The tips of the blades of grass had dried up, the birds had stopped chirping, and it felt so good to come home after school in Sophia's company. All my school years, I had known myself as a quiet guy, as unnoticeable as a shadow. I would have never thought that fate would bring me together with such a hooligan as a girl like her. Sophia always wore similar t-shirts with cartoon prints, blue sneakers, and light jeans, which I suspected she had cut herself. I sometimes saw her in the corridors, but I didn't know much about her, except that teachers often scolded her for her rebellious appearance when she came without her school uniform. Each time she would nod guiltily at the teacher's reproaches, but then repeat her antics over and over again. We met by chance in line at the vending machine on the first floor. Sophia got mad at me because I bought the last can of her favorite soda. She genuinely believed it was unfair and that I should have given her the drink for free. We laughed about it for a long time afterward, such an absurd situation. This girl was in the grade below me, and even back then, in September, I realized that our meeting was a valuable gift. In just a year, I would be leaving for UBU in another city, while Sophia would stay in school. So, when the next autumn came, we'd already be far from each other. She was my complete opposite. Sophia could pull off a silly prank at any moment and drag me into her almost harmless mischief. Once, she took me to swim at a forbidden quarry, and when a guard with a dog spotted us, we laughed and ran away. Another time, while walking near a gardening association, she asked me to pick her a bouquet of flowers from someone else's garden. I did it, even though I was risking getting a slap for trespassing. But what wouldn't you do for a girl? With her, I felt alive, like I had a chance not just to live out this year, but to make it unforgettable. I knew we still had many wonderful moments ahead and didn't want to miss any of them. It seemed like there was something special developing between us, but I was too afraid to take the first step. What if she said we were just friends and nothing more? I decided to let things go as usual and let time tell. Despite the sadness from our inevitable parting, a spark of hope still burned within me. Another school day had come to an end, and Sophia and I were walking home. The road to our neighborhood stretched past the forest. She glanced into the dense spruce trees on the other side of the road, her expression telling me she had thought of another adventure. "Oliver, there's a cemetery there. Let's go for a walk," she suggested, and before I had time to answer, Sophia was already running toward the crosswalk. The forest was cool and smelled of fallen pine needles. We walked along the path, tossing jokes about death and funerals, and eventually found ourselves surrounded by fences, crosses, and marble slabs, just us kids, venturing where few dared. Dozens of faces, names, dates, and inscriptions surrounded us. You left this life in an instant, but the pain lingers forever. I'm nearby, yet I can't embrace you. Eternal memories from children and grandchildren. Fresh and withered flowers lie on the graves, gathering dust. It didn't matter much. I just followed Sophia because she wanted to. We crossed the entire burial ground and hurried into the forest, leaving the graves behind. My friend moved confidently ahead, while I anxiously glanced at the thick trees, worried we might get lost. The deeper we went, the darker it became. The sun sank lower and lower, and the forest closed in around us. We stopped. "What is that?" she asked, pointing into the distance. I squinted and saw rows of wooden poles with signs. The ground beneath them was freshly plowed. One sign read, "Unidentified man." About a meter away, another sign said, "Unidentified woman, 50 years and older." "What is this?" I asked, bewildered. "I think it's a cemetery for the homeless," Sophia replied, fear flickering in her wide eyes. I felt a cold shiver, not from the evening air, but from realizing where we had wandered. A cemetery for the homeless. This is how they are buried, without honors, beneath faceless plaques on posts. Some markers had only 3-digit numbers, and even the gender wasn't always indicated. On the oldest ones, stenciled in grim letters, was a chilling word, biomaterial. Sophia's usual cheerfulness faded as she said, "It's as if they were planting cucumbers. I don't really care how they bury me, but this is just disrespectful. They might as well burn me in the garden and stick a plaque over the ashes that says, 'Biomaterial.'" I nodded silently. That word struck me too. It made it feel as if these people were no longer human, but some kind of raw material. We stood there quietly, staring at the rows of plaques in the middle of the forest. I began to think about birth and death. Every person enters the world as a nameless, crying baby, but immediately receives a name and a surname. They grow up, develop a personality, live a life, and eventually die. They're remembered by their loved ones, sometimes by the next generation. The markers of memory, name, surname, birth date, and death, record that a person once existed. But standing in that cemetery, I realized not everyone gets that privilege. Some people die as if they never existed. No one knew them, and no one remembers them. The world forgets. I wanted to go home. This was the worst place for a walk with a girl, definitely not romantic. But Sophia rushed forward like a wind-up toy. "And what's this?" she asked, running ahead. "Look." Her voice trembled with a mix of horror and curiosity. "They don't dig separate graves here. They dig one long trench and toss in the bodies, covering them with dirt like a conveyor belt of corpses." She was right. The trench filled gradually as new bodies arrived. Sophia stepped closer to the edge, peered down, and immediately jumped back. I saw the edge of a box nailed together, and inside it was a dark green body bag. The unbearable stench of decay hung in the air. It was enough to make me choke. "Let's get out of here," I demanded, coughing from nausea. We turned and hurried away from that terrible place, walking quickly. Sophia, usually cheerful and fearless, now moved silently like a frightened squirrel. The sight had ruined our mood, leaving me overwhelmed with shock, sadness, and disgust. I admitted she was right. We took the stakes to school, hiding them behind a fence, and picked them up on the way back. We probably looked ridiculous, like kids playing knights, but it made us feel safer. Sophia and I grew closer, joking about getting matching tattoos when we were older. Time passed, and the fear we once had began to fade. We got used to walking past the forest quickly. One evening, we stayed late at school and had to walk home in the dark again. There were no buses, so we walked in silence, moving from one street lamp to the next, constantly checking around us. The snow creaked loudly underfoot, and the dark forest loomed, feeling like something was watching. Though the rumors about people being bitten had died down, it was still unnerving to walk there. We held hands, trying to shake off the fear with smiles. I hoped we'd slip past the gloomy area and get home soon. But suddenly, a dark figure appeared in front of us, standing motionless in the road. Didn't people notice the smell of a rotting dog? What kind of dogs were they? Blood-sucking ghouls, risen from their graves. I saw them. I saw them attack a man, gnaw at his neck, and drink his blood, but no one wanted to listen. They all kept talking about rabid animals, how to catch or kill them. People didn't realize the real threat, but I knew who would believe me. Sophia never doubted my sanity. I rushed to her, barely recovering from the shock, and told her everything. "Are you kidding me? Vampires?" she asked in surprise. "Ghouls," I corrected her. "Not those cold, handsome men from Gothic novels, real, rotting, blood-sucking corpses. We saw one in that cemetery for the homeless, remember? I think they came from there." "Are you absolutely sure?" Sophia squinted, looking at me suspiciously. "We didn't see him up close, and you didn't see him clearly. It could have just been one of the gravediggers. Scary, dirty, but still human. His job isn't exactly clean." "It all fits," I insisted. "I overheard people saying that this summer and autumn there were several deaths, all with torn throats. The bodies were found near that forest and in the surrounding areas. These aren't living people. They reek of death. If this is real, why hasn't anyone figured it out? I asked, turning to her. Someone must know, just not telling regular people, Sophia replied, finally nodding. I thought I had convinced her. We decided not to stay out late anymore, always heading home while there was still daylight, but we couldn't always stick to that plan. One day, we had to stay at school until dark. The literary competition dragged on forever. We sat in the auditorium listening to students from different classes read their essays. My friend and I were in the back, quietly chatting, trying to stay sane. But then we realized we'd have to walk home in the dark, past that forest. Sophia grabbed my arm as we walked. It was the first time she'd touched me, but a sudden rustle pulled me from my thoughts. We stopped, listening. The sound came from the other side of the road, from the forest, like something being slaughtered. But in the dark it was impossible to see clearly. Look, someone's there, Sophia whispered. I turned to see a man staggering toward us, his head tilted from side to side like a drunk. The light from a street lamp fell on his face, or what was left of it. His skin was green, rotting, and his clothes were in tatters. He opened his mouth and groaned, revealing yellow, sharp teeth. A ghoul. A real ghoul. Sophia's eyes widened, and she squeezed my hand tightly. At that moment, another figure appeared on the other side of the road, coming from the forest. It dragged a torn plastic body bag, the same one it must have crawled out of. "We need to go," I shouted, pulling Sophia by the hand. We ran down the street, focusing on the slippery road ahead. Sophia didn't lag behind, but I kept looking back. The ghouls were slow, fortunately too slow to catch us that night. We finally reached our poorly lit street and stopped to catch our breath. "And I doubted it," Sophia said, trembling. She wasn't looking at me, but into the distance, as if trying to process everything. "I thought you were joking about the ghouls, just playing along." She seemed so confused, and I didn't know what to say in this bizarre situation. "Don't go anywhere without me," I said, holding her shoulders and looking into her frightened eyes. "Agreed," she whispered and hugged me tightly, seeking protection from everything that had just happened, or what might happen next. Then she let me go and ran into her building. I couldn't shake off the fear for a long time after that night, and I worried even more about Sophia. I wasn't sure how she was dealing with it. But the next day, Sunday, she came to my house. I opened the door and she stood there with a wide smile, holding 2 long branches. "What's this?" I asked, confused by the wooden sticks. "Let's make steaks," she said, grinning. The idea was crazy, but very much in her style. We didn't know if aspen steaks actually worked against ghouls, but we hoped our ancestors hadn't invented it out of thin air. I invited her in, and we quietly dragged the branches to my room. We locked the door and started sharpening them with a knife. "Should we make them shorter?" I asked, thinking the steaks were too long. "No, the longer the better," Sophia replied. "You don't want a ghoul getting too close, right? Steaks are short in movies because of the camera angles. We need to stay alive, not look cool." We had long forgotten about them and didn't carry them with us. But here in front of us was a dead man again. As luck would have it, he caught us by surprise. The ghoul moved from his place and slowly walked toward us, stretching out a rotting lantern. His already blackened face, with eyes sinking into the skull, appeared, and yellow bones showed through the cracked flesh. "Let's go, let's go!" I pulled Sophia by the hand, but she didn't move. "Wait for me. Something interesting," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. I thought that the girl didn't realize what she was doing. She looked closely at the dead man and suddenly addressed him loudly, asking, "What's your name?" The ghoul stopped. His jaw twitched as if he were trying to force some sounds out of himself with an effort of will. His tongue moved like a dry leaf in his mouth. "Victor," the stinking ghoul spoke hoarsely. I stood in horror, thinking about Kamenev. "And my friend," as if knowing what to do, Oliver said, "We will remember you, Victor." The dead man bowed his head as if nodding, and then turned to the side and walked into the forest. Crossing the road, he fell to the ground and was no longer tired. He had finally died. I thought about it a lot, read old beliefs, and then I just assumed that it could really work, said Sophia, foreseeing my question. Probably they couldn't calm down because no one remembers them. Nameless dead people. It's unfair. And if it hadn't worked, I was stunned. Then we would have become dates on a cold piece of marble. Well, how we smiled, she said. She would have become, and they would have burned me in the garden. Yeah, you're being silly, I laughed, feeling my anxiety fade away. We walked the rest of the way home silently. I floated into my thoughts, trying to comprehend what had happened, but unable to utter a word. Snow was falling. Fluffy flakes like feathers settled on Sophia's long hair. In this silence, the creak of our steps echoed. That evening, I realized that I didn't want to say goodbye to her at the end of the school year, so I decided I would go to a university closer to my hometown.